Some of you may be familiar with the parts framework. So parts in memory therapy, it's something that Jay Norix developed. Now, there's other modalities that utilize parts work. There's modalities that utilize, taking advantage of memory reconsolidation. And this is kind of a blend of those two things. So we can work with trauma, we can work with a part of someone's personality that's hurt, but we can also gain access to painful memories and use interventions to neutralize. So what this looks like, say, in my practice, I have someone come in, they're feeling an emotion. We go back to the first time they remember feeling that. And by the time that they leave my office, that memory doesn't bother them. So something that, even if it was a 10 out of 10, for me, I'm at the point where it's a 0 out of 10. So like on a regular basis, I would have multiple memories with multiple patients that we would just be neutralizing trauma. It seems fantastic. It seems crazy. But I imagine when EMDR came out, there was a similar sort of skepticism, a healthy skepticism of, hey, this used to take 2 years. Why is this taking weeks now? I don't know if that's real, but parts of memory therapy works on similar theoretical foundations of EMDR. But I'll come back to that. So what is parts? So one of the assumptions of this approach is that the self is not unitary. For example, part of me wants to get out of bed in the morning. Part of me wants to go to sleep. We have multiple thoughts, multiple emotions, multiple feelings. And the idea is we can connect with a part of us, and that part of us holds memories with that associated emotion. Now, what this looks like in real life, if I'm in an argument with my spouse, and we've had this argument multiple times, and we start to have this argument again, all the memories of the previous times we've had the argument, all the mistakes, all the things that made me upset are coming to my mind. It's very easily accessible, but a joke is not easily accessible. That's not the ego state that's forward. That's not the part of my personality that's forward. But vice versa, if I was at a comedy club and I was laughing and I was listening and I hear all these jokes, it would be a lot harder for me to remember all the times that made me upset about my wife. So, by the way, I love my wife. This is just an example. So the idea is parts of us carry memories, and those memories, when there's a lot of emotional weight to it, and if they're not healed, if we come up with anything somewhat similar, our brain goes back and pulls that emotion forward, just all the information, not just the emotion, but here's all the information associated with this thing you're experiencing. Here you go. But now this emotion is amplified. I'm triggered. I'm feeling more than what is situationally appropriate. So parts in memory therapy has a lot to do. A lot of the focus is on the trauma. And then some of the focus is also on working with parts. It differs from other therapies in the sense that there's not a lot of, the goal of the therapy and of the approach isn't necessarily to gain any sort of enlightenment or understanding even about oneself. That seems to be a kind of a byproduct. The goal of the therapy is basically to get access to memories, neutralize the memories, and not be as triggered. So the idea of parts has been around for a long time. Some maybe well-known forerunners might be Morton Prince. He talked about parts in the sense of there's different sides to us. There's a Robert Asiaji, I can't pronounce the name. He talked about parts as subpersonalities. His therapeutic approach was a psychosynthesis. Um, Stone and Winkleman, or Stone and Stone, uh, they described it as voices or voice dialogue. Um, Watkins had something called the silent abreaction, where a person would imagine walking on a path and seeing a big boulder and using a stick to beat the boulder, and this was a way for them to kind of express their emotion and not feel it as much anymore. Watkins and Watkins expressed their, sorry, I get distracted. Watkins and Watkins described it as an ego state. And then in 1995, there was a Richard Schwartz. He described it as parts or subpersonalities. So that's the IFS. That's maybe the one of the most well-known is IFS.
Hopefully tomorrow.
Okay, so with parts of memory therapy, we have this conception, and we have the conscious self, and then we have a freestanding part, a part of us that carries an emotion. Now, what we want to do with parts of memory therapy is we want to get access to the early memories, then the most disturbing memories, and then we want to neutralize that. There's a significant effect of how someone feels when we neutralize the earliest and then the most disturbing memories. Okay, so how does this work? So I'm going to talk about memory reconsolidation. This is the scientific basis of why parts of memory therapy works. So if we think about memory, what does it have to do with trauma? What does memory have to do with everyday emotions? Has a lot, has almost everything to do with trauma. So our unhealed past memories exacerbate our present experience when we get triggered, but it doesn't have to be just trauma. That's also just emotional learning. So if there's something that we learned in the past, maybe it's not necessarily PTSD, but we still might have like an emotionally learned response. So we have this experience, and our memory kind of forms. Well, what happens is every time we think about something in the past, we reactivate a past memory, and it reconsolidates. So these neural synapses open up, and this memory becomes editable. And in fact, it does edit every single time slightly differently. So when we remember something, we remember the last time we remembered it. Reactivation of consolidated memories returns them to a protein synthesis dependent state. One interpretation of these findings is that the memory reconsolidates after use. So this was not really well known. It was not well known prior to the early 2000s. They knew that EMDR worked. They didn't know why. So now we have this, with this research that's been done, we have this understanding, oh, EMDR is providing something that will, an intervention that will actually affect the memory. So when that memory reconsolidates, it's not as bothersome. So basically, like I said, this was not well known. This says it was discovered in the early 1997, 2000 period. Really, it took off with a paper in 2003. It was done on rats with fear. Bruce Ecker has talked about it in coherence therapy. What they do is they'll have a negative memory and activate a positive memory. And now there's this mismatch. And this negative memory will reconsolidate with kind of conflicting information or less intensity. They did a study with the Boston Marathon bombing with propranolol. So they had people write out their experience and how traumatic it was. They gave them propranolol. So they activated the memory. They gave them an intervention, followed up a week later. They asked them to write everything down again, but this time it was less traumatic. It was less bothersome. So that paper was this was kind of more from a psychiatric perspective. But because this is happening anyway, this has huge implications of what we can do with our patients. This memory reconsolidation, this would allow someone to unlearn something that has been learned. So, but it's not always appropriate. It's not always the right thing. For example, if I have a fear of public speaking, and this fear comes from me never speaking in front of anyone, there's nothing to unlearn. This wouldn't be the best approach, but maybe like behavioral therapy and learning like to kind of psych myself up, build new skills, gain confidence, that would be more appropriate. However, vice versa, let's say this fear comes from this memory I have of peeing my pants in front of the kindergarten class. Well, now there's this memory, I think about it, and it's like a 9 out of 10. I'm just mortified. And now when I'm in front of people and I just feel so self-conscious, I just want to get out of there. And it's going to be pretty hard to kind of like build up positive emotions to outweigh this. But if we can unlearn this through memory reconsolidation, if there's interventions that can affect this memory, we will no longer have that emotionally learned response. When our brain goes, picks up that information and brings it to us, we're now not feeling the emotion because the emotion's no longer separate or no longer connected with the memory. So how it works is we have an emotional experience. This will go into the formation of a new memory. It will consolidate. That will be a stored memory. We can then activate that memory by retrieving it. So in parts of memory therapy, we then do a neutralization technique. So when it reconsolidates, we have a memory that's altered. Now, when I say altered, it's the implicit that we care about. The explicit memory we don't touch in this approach. We keep that the same. So the story, like the facts of what happened, that's there. We just want to take the emotions out of what happened. All right, I'm going to skip ahead. There's just more information on memory reconsolidation, how it works. All right, so like I said, in layman's terms, when we remember something, we remember the last time we remembered it. In mammals, they've seen that this this reconsolidation window is about 5 hours. So in therapy, like if I have someone that's going to go to Frightmares, for example, I wouldn't want them to go right after a session. I would have this maybe a little bit of a concern that this. So I just talked about this a moment ago. Implicit, this is kind of more emotional memory, procedural memory. It's the emotional aspect that we care about. The autobiographical events of the memory we don't want to change. But that's okay if something doesn't hurt anymore. So when we do, like I was saying, when we do it, when we take emotions out of the memory, all we care about with this approach is just healing the memory, having the subjective unit of distress be a 0 out of 10. So that's the goal. The goal of this approach is just neutralize past memories. But all the other aspects we don't touch. We think it's okay. So if there's a traumatic thing that happened, but it doesn't bother me anymore, I can still use this knowledge that this thing happened and make smart choices. So if I got mugged in an alley and I have this experience and it's not healed and it has emotional weight to it, I could walk by an alley, I could have a fight or flight response. That might serve a purpose to protect me. However, if I forgot, then I wouldn't have that protection, right? But if the memory doesn't have the emotions to it, I walk by an alley, I think to myself, oh, I got mugged in a place like this. Could look around. It's daylight, I'm with a group of people, I'm okay. Or it's dark, I'm by myself, this is dumb. I'm going to turn around, walk away, make sure I'm safe. So the ability to protect oneself is still there when we have that, the memory still there. All right, so the assumptions of this approach is that our memories are sectioned off. There's parts of our personality that carry weight. And not just that, we have this assumption that sometimes things need to be healed in two different ways. We have this assumption that there's these memories that have emotional weight, but also sometimes certain events become almost a part of who we are. So in parts in memory therapy, we have this approach of working on the memory, but then also checking in and working with the part that held that memory. And if it's a 0 in the memory and it's a 0 with the part, the patient should feel a 0 out of 10 when they think of the memory. There's some instances where the memory will be a 0, but there will be a part of their personality that also needs healing. So if they imagine themselves in the memory, asking the memory part, how bothersome is it? That memory part will say it's a 0. But if it's ever not like that, if it's ever outside of that scenario where they just think of the memory and they're not asking, and it comes up, it needs to be done in a slightly different way. So some people like to combine, for example, EMDR and IFS. This is kind of a marriage of similar ideologies, I suppose. So in this modality, we define the problem as just unhealed, unprocessed experiences that cause us to feel excessive emotions that aren't situationally appropriate. These can be negative emotions. These could be positive emotions. So with this approach, we don't just go back and take out the negative feelings, but with something like addiction, the first time someone ever used, you could go back to that memory, you could take out the emotions from that, you could move towards the positive high that they experienced, you could take out the emotions from that. Well, now that memory is a 0. What we've done is we've eliminated this huge gap where they were feeling awful and feeling really good. So now the memory is neutral, and that can really help with like decreasing the feeling of like the chasing their first high. So that's the goal of this approach. And there's other situations where we would neutralize emotions that aren't technically negative, but I won't get into that today. All right, so this slide is maybe more for for someone that is a little bit nerdy like myself. So I once read a critique of one of Jay Norick's books where someone was saying, this is just extinction. And this isn't. This is biologically different than extinction. So extinction is when we have, let's say, this behavior, and let's say there's this emotion contributing to this behavior, but we have a positive learned response, a positive emotion now outweighs this behavior, and this is no longer dominant. So this is learning where, so desensitization happens through extinction with like cognitive behavioral therapy, but when it comes to what this approach is doing, what parts of memory therapy is doing, it's unlearning. So it's having more to do with the memory than it has anything to do with learning a new response. So we just unlearned something. So this approach is very well suited for something like PTSD. And then there's some things that it wouldn't help with. ADHD. This won't help ADHD. I once talked with a therapist and said they told me they were treating a patient with ADHD with EMDR, and I slapped myself in the face fairly hard. That's not anyway. So that doesn't make sense to me, essentially. So we want to use this approach when it makes sense. We want to use it specifically for unlearning. And then we know that there's some situations where it's not going to be as useful, like ADHD. I mean, emotion regulation has a bit to do with ADHD, but really, you'd want to treat that in a different way. So measurements. The subjective unit of distress, this is when we ask someone, how bothersome is that on a scale of 0 to 10? And we get a response. So like I said, our goal is to get that to a 0. One of the things that I use in my practice, and anyone working with PTSD or complex PTSD, I'd recommend using the dissociative experience scale, with the second one, or there's others. But what this does is it lets you know how likely it is for someone to dissociate. So if you're just learning an approach like this, you have the scale, someone comes back and they score like 25, wait, don't jump in. Maybe try it on different patients. But you want to become very familiar with an approach and you want to know what to do when it's emotionally flooding. Likewise, with like EMDR, someone takes level 1, they don't want to jump right in with like heavy PTSD. They want to take level 2 before that so they can handle those sort of situations. All right, so approaches that are using memory reconsolidation, EMDR, coherence therapy, hypnosis, rapid resolution therapy, narrative, there's others. So there's a few. So the difference is these therapies help reduce the stress of a memory, where parts of memory therapy can neutralize it completely. And I'm not saying that others can't, sometimes they do. But the idea is, it's like I was saying, that combination of EMDR and IFS, if it doesn't hurt here and it doesn't hurt here, it should be entirely a 0 out of 10 for the patient going forward and staying that way as well. So the tools we use in this approach, the ES scale, subjective unit of distress. Now this, for example, if you look at this, you can take a moment and notice, how bothersome is this for me on a scale of 0 to 10? That's the SUD scale. But we also have something called the SU scale. So this is units of energy that are less, it's just not bothersome. It could be a positive emotion. For example, I guess I took out that picture. There's a picture of a puppy I had. But yeah, you could take a moment and kind of see how that would affect you. Okay, so I'm going to now go through the parts, just basically the protocol. So I've explained what it is, how to go about it. Next, I'm going to go through how it's done, and then I'm going to do a demonstration. And then we're going to talk about it afterwards. But up to this point, up to, the why picture of the spider, that was so you could take a moment and notice on a scale of 0 to 10 how bothersome it was. I probably shouldn't go back to it. But up to this point, any questions about what I've talked about so far?
There is a question in the chat. It looks like Kenwin is asking, it looks like she says, I love the DES, but it's so long. Is there a short one you could recommend?
It is long. It's 28 questions. I don't know of any that are, I don't know, honest, that are shorter. There might be one. I'm not sure why this is quitting. All right. So any other questions aside from the DES that I don't know, have an answer for that one, but email me if you find one. Email it to me. I would like to know. Yeah, I can't go back on the chat now, but all right. So moving on to how parts of memory therapy, how do we do it? So it's fairly simple. I call it DFAN, kind of like defense, just as an acronym to remember. We define the problem. We find the part of someone's personality that carries that problem. We elicit that memory that we want to work on. So, like I said earlier, earliest and the most intense are typically going to have the most weight and the most difference of when we neutralize. And then we neutralize it. So what this would look like, say someone comes in, I'll give you a real example. At one of the trainings that I did, there was a volunteer and he said he had a phobia of elevators. So that was the problem that he defined. So we had him notice that emotion, found that part of his personality that carried that emotion. We had him imagine asking that part of his personality to bring up the memory. He already knew the memory though. So he had been into elevator accidents. So then we had him imagine walking into the memory, going up to the memory version of himself, asking him if it's okay if he helps that version of him feel better. Then he asked that version of him, the memory version, if he would like to have those emotions blown away by wind, for example. So then we had him visualize wind blowing away the feelings and checked in again. How bothersome is the memory now on a scale of 0 to 10? It was less. We did it again. It was less. We did it again. It was a 0. Now this was a long time ago, so I might get some details off. I don't know if it's actually wind. I don't know if it was actually 3 times it took to get a 0, but he was able to neutralize it. And then by the time he came to the level 2 training, he had gone to a therapist and had the second memory neutralized because of this. Like I said, there's 2 elevator accidents for this individual. And then with those both neutralized, he tried going and being on an elevator and he was able to, and it didn't cause any panic. It was no longer bothersome. So we took something that was emotionally learned, changed the memory, and now his behavior was different and he felt better and he was able to do things, whereas before he wasn't. So that's the gist. That's the gist of it. It's one thing to have me kind of tell you about it. It's another thing to see it done. And then it's another also to experience it. Honestly, like I'm skeptical by nature. I was very skeptical of this approach. I saw people like in demonstrations, things were no longer bothersome. Okay, I did it for myself. I volunteered. I was like, wow, that really, yeah, that was no joke. That felt intense. That felt very relieving. And then also seeing that carried on, that going forward, that those memories were no longer bothersome. So what I want to do today, right now, is I found a volunteer, and I wanted to have a demonstration so you could see. But rather than having it be on Zoom, I found someone in our hospital, probably for like legal reasons. So yeah, we're gonna do a demonstration real quick afterwards. You can ask me questions, you can ask her questions. All right. And I'm just gonna check this chat real quick.
Preston, there's someone that says, what about brain spotting?
Okay. Yeah, so I believe that one also, similar to EMDR, that is also a modality that takes advantage of memory reconsolidation. So it's a different method to get the memory, a different method of intervention, but it's accomplishing the same goal. So it's just another modality that kind of accomplishes the same goal. Kind of like we have a lot of similarities maybe between like cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy. Both are behavioral therapies and working through extinction. Whereas brain spotting, the mechanism of change would be the altered memory. All right, so if I cover my mic, can you still hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to go through it, and I think I'm going to do one of two things. I might go through, or there might be a memory that this person has already in mind. So did you want to introduce yourself?
Your trauma survivor.
Trauma survivor. Okay. Are you okay with me doing the full protocol?
Sure.
Or would you want to just do like a memory that you're okay with the full protocol?
Yeah.
Okay. What emotion would you want to experience less of?
Terror.
Terror. Okay. So I will say normally I don't dive in something this deep for a presentation, but today I am. Okay. So let's go with that. So we have the problem. Now we want to find the part. So I want you to like this terror, do you feel some of it right now?
A little.
Okay. I want you to close your eyes, notice that sensation, and ask that feeling to present an image of itself. So that part of you that feels terror, and this is your imagination. So any picture can come up. Let me know what does.
Probably like a steel pipe.
Like a steel pipe. Interesting. Okay. So this might be what we're looking for. It might not be. Well, let's find out. Ask that steel pipe if we'll let it know you'd like to help it feel better, and ask it if it's okay with that.
Sounds like a great idea.
Okay, it responded. So maybe this is the part of you that we're looking for. Okay. Ask it if it would share with you its earliest, still bothersome memory. So you're imagining asking the steel pipe for its earliest bothersome memory. Because that image of the pipe is just a representation of your fear.
Yeah, for sure. Probably around like 2.5.
Okay. So memory came up. It gave you a memory. Can you see yourself in this memory? I want you to imagine stepping into that memory, going up to the 2.5 version of you. Let her know that you've come back to help her feel better. Ask her if she's okay with that. Okay. So maybe take her a little bit away, maybe like 30 feet or 50 feet away from where she was.
Okay.
Ask her on a scale of 0 to 10, how bothersome is what's happened? 10 being the most she could feel.
6.
Okay. Would she like to let go of the emotions using wind, water, or fire?
Fire.
Okay. Would she like the fire to burn the feelings off of her, or would she like to throw the emotions into the fire?
Throw them in.
Go ahead and take her to a big fire pit. And imagine all of her emotions congregating into the center of her body like a powerful magnet, just brings it all together. Have her reach in, grab those feelings, and throw it into the fire. And imagine it bursting into flames, shooting sparks, different colors of flames and smoke, and it shriveling, breaking into pieces, and fire devouring it until there's nothing left to burn.
Okay.
Once that has happened, ask her on a scale of 0 to 10, how much does what happened bother her now?
Maybe like a 3.
Let her know she's doing great. And that this normally takes 2 or 3 times. Have her notice the remaining feelings, bringing everything she can into the center of her body, having her reach in and pull out those sensations, those emotions, have her throw it into the fire, having the fire dissolve, and burn away into ash and smoke everything that was there. Once that has happened, have her step away and let's check in. Ask her on a scale of 0 to 10, how much does what happened bother her now?
Maybe like a 1.
A 1. Ask her if she's okay with it being a 0.
Okay.
Have her reach in, grab the remaining bits and pieces. Have her pull that out and throw it into the fire. And let me know once everything has been thrown into the fire. Imagine everything that's in the fire just burning into ash until there's nothing left. And let me know once that has happened. Ask her on a scale of 0 to 10, how much does what happened bother her now?
I'd say overall it's better.
Okay. Does she say a 0? And this is coming from her. Good. Let her know she did great. You can thank her. You can take her back several feet away from the memory and you can say goodbye. Imagine stepping out of that memory. And I want you to go back to that picture of the steel pipe and ask that image, when it thinks of that memory, how much is it bothered on a scale of 0 to 10?
I'd say 0.
Okay. Go ahead and thank it and you can open your eyes. So we did this and I don't know what the memory is. And that's actually one thing I really like about this approach. But what was it like for you?
Therapeutic.
Therapeutic?
Really though.
Yeah. I often describe it feeling like I've just cried, even though I haven't. Is it a similar sensation
Yeah,
for you?
I thought I might, yeah.
Yeah. All right, any questions? Any questions about, oh, I guess you couldn't see her too much. Any questions about the approach? Any questions for me or her? Oh, I see one. Do I always go so fast? This is my style. Most people that do parts of memory therapy don't go as fast as me. No. But this is, I'm kind of showing how I do this, also how quickly it could be done. My goal is to get to the memory, neutralize it, and then come back. And if I wanted to continue working with fear, I would have her go to that part of her that's the steel pipe, ask it for the next earliest bothersome memory, or ask it for the most intense bothersome memory. So that's kind of like the memory bank that we would go to and get access to the early and most bothersome memories. So that me going fast is just my style, but it's not a style of the approach. If you look up parts of memory therapy on YouTube, you can see Jay Norrick's doing it. It's about an hour. He has about an hour's worth. Well, he's got several different sessions. So you could kind of see his approach, and he's kind of the founder. He likes to take his time. Well, everyone, it seems, likes to take their time. I just seemingly somehow have a preference to go fast. Is it always streamlined? Anything come up making it harder? Yes. Yes, things do come up that make it harder. Oh, the name of the person is Jay Norrick. He was the developer. So what comes up to make it harder is parts of our own personality. Sometimes we have a concern that if something, for example, this is just an example, Sometimes we have a concern that if something doesn't hurt anymore, does that mean I won't be protected? So sometimes with trauma, especially complex PTSD, there's this subconscious fear of, what if I allow this memory to be a 0 out of 10, does that mean I'm going to get hurt? So this is something that we address. Therapists are taught how to do this in the level 2 training of parts and memory therapy, because that does come up. And as far as that other question, what did the steel pipe represent? Again, that was just an externalization of an emotion. So when she asked her feeling of terror for an image of itself, her imagination brought up that image of the steel pipe. Does the influence of the therapist impact the results? I mean, yes and no. You can have therapists that aren't very confident, and Jane Norricks with Norricks, I think maybe it's one R. But the impacting the results, if you have a therapist that's not confident and they say, imagine wind blowing it away, and they don't kind of walk the person through it, that's fine. That doesn't make a difference. It still seems to work. However, if you have a therapist that is, no, we are doing this approach, you are imagining this, you're imagining the emotions being blown away, and they're having this kind of like non collaborative stance. It's okay to have an expert stance, but you also want to be very collaborative with your patients. I have seen someone who their therapist did this approach, they pushed them too hard, the person dissociated, they couldn't remember what happened, and they were not a fan after that. So that also EMDR, I've seen that someone goes, they're emotionally flooded, they have bad experience, they don't go back. So we want to be collaborative with our patients. We want to make sure that they are okay. So if you notice, when I ask her if she's okay if we let this go, ask her if she's okay if this is a 0 out of 10. And if that part of her is not, we want to address that. That's something that's kind of taught in the level 2 trainings. Not any, I mean, when it comes to evidence-based research on this is, I want people to research it. There's a pilot study, about 10 people, that it was done, published in like a
Hello,
magazine.
Rebecca.
I'm
doing well.
I think we need to mute someone. It's using interventions. It's using a lot that's already different evidence-based approaches, but I would absolutely love for this to get to be studied. So if anyone wants to, I will absolutely help you. Is it okay to leave it at a 2? Not in this approach. It's not neutralized if it's not a 0. In this approach, the goal is to have it be a 0. The concern is that it can creep back up, but once it's a 0, it does not. It stays a 0. So, and there are some times where something gets down to a 2, but like I said, there's issues that might come up. But that is something that's taught in like the advanced trainings of what to do. So like the goal is to get it to a 0, and then if issues come up, you're taught what to do about those issues in the level 2 training. There's a training that's here at the hospital. Level 1 is April 27th. Level 2 is May 25th. So they're both on Saturdays. It's going to be a hybrid of, I guess, in person and Zoom. And if you're interested about that, then you just ask Joseph Turk and he will forward information along. Yes, that is correct. April 27th and May 25th. See if there's any other questions. Any questions for her, any questions of what it was like for her? How many emotions do I neutralize in one session? I do all the emotions of the memory. I've had patients where we've done a lot. This is probably why I go fast. But it's up to the therapist. I don't think you could do like too many memories in one session. But it was regular for me to like have 5 memories in a session. With parts of memory therapy, it's a modality that is just for the past. So it's not a modality that you would necessarily use every single session, because there's things that you would want to teach your clients or patients. So one session might be parts of memory therapy. Next week might be CBT. It's tiring for the clients and the therapist. It's tiring for the patient. Do you feel tired? Yeah. It's tiring for the patient, not so much the therapist. Also, it's the one thing I like about it is we're able to help trauma without the therapist feeling overwhelmed. So like for example, I would regularly see 36 or more patients in a week, and I wouldn't feel burnt out because I wouldn't be feeling what my patients are feeling. Can this modify attachment schemas? Yes, it can. To unlearn memories of abandonment, unlearn the emotions associated with those memories, then we don't have as much fear of being abandoned. So this very well complements something like emotionally focused therapy when working with our attachment needs. And not just like the abandonment, but like feelings of shame as well. Another reason why I like this approach is because you can work on shame, neutralize memories of shame, and the patient doesn't have to tell you what the shameful memory was. But when it's neutralized, they're often okay with doing that because it doesn't bother them anymore. But this is really good to use with attachment needs or attachment injuries. Any other way that you would explain it, being like from your therapeutic perspective, or just as the patient, can you kind of let us know just a little bit what that was like?
I think it was interesting. I think it would be interesting to like let's say terror, what I described, to take that and then like, we used it at like an early age, but then continue it, and just keep going with it.
Yeah. And so the idea with this is like if it's long term, we would go back to the more early memories. And then we'd wait until like we get to the early memories where it's like, 3, 4 out of 10. We'd shift over to the most intense memories and we'd go through and neutralize those until like the most intense is like a 3 or something. At that point, when we've done a lot of the early foundational memories and the most intense memories, that feeling of terror would be a lot more situationally appropriate. And then that triggered response would be much less. And sometimes even after one session, people can notice a difference, but that's generally if there's like a single event that has a ton of weight. This one was a 6 out of 10, so I don't know how much you'll notice from this, but if there's like a 10 out of 10 single event and that's neutralized, oftentimes the person feels better immediately.
That's nice.
Yeah. How long does the effect of the treatment, and so that memory is reconsolidating right now, and it will stay that way. So next time it's this memory is reactivated, it's not bringing forward emotions. So it theoretically should stay a 0. Now if, for example, as this is reconsolidating, if she got into a car accident and this fear came up, there's a possibility that it could attach itself to that memory and it would have to be done a second time. How do you deal with repression, where's the memories, but the patient doesn't have to feel it. So it's the same protocol. So we'd have her go through and imagine the emotion, or if she can't even like, say she can't even visualize her emotion. If there's no way for us to externalize it or have her imagine this is the part of me that carries this emotion, then there's ways to go back to early memory still. But all we need is a way to externalize the emotion, have her ask that emotion for the earliest, or that part for its earliest bothersome or still bothersome memory. And oftentimes, even for memories that were repressed, that can come up. So the protocol is the same. And let's say she walks into the emotion, she's not feeling it, she's detached from the memory. But when she goes in and she asks the memory version of herself, then the memory version says, oh, it's a 7 out of 10. Still go through the same process. So it can still be healing. She doesn't have to be activated with the emotion. The memory activation is her going into the memory, looking around, checking in with the memory version of her. So even if she's somewhat like, I'm not feeling it, but in my mind, it's a 7 out of 10, that version of me, memory version of me is feeling it. As long as that's neutralized, it's the same protocol. How does it techniques to described in the book of the emotion code? This is more visualization. This isn't as much like this is more memory reconsolidation, changing the memory, working with parts. Multiple emotions associated with a traumatic memory, that's okay. You still have them imagine letting go of all the emotions, burning away all the emotions. And you just check in. I clump them together. Sometimes I will do it like, let's work with sadness first and then anger, because sometimes that part of them doesn't want to let go of anger. So I just work with sadness. When that's 0, then I check in. If anger is not reduced, ask if it's okay at that point to let go of that. So that's okay. And even with multiple emotions, I first let go of everything that's negative, but then go back with some memories. And I didn't do this here, but some memories I'll go back and I'll have them check in. When you think of this memory, so they're talking to the memory version of themselves. Is there any other emotions associated with this memory that maybe aren't negative that you would like to let go of? And I frame it that way because I don't necessarily want to call something that like a physiological response of being assaulted. I don't want to call that positive. But I might want to check in and see if there is that sort of unit of energy there, if there's that emotion or that experience, so that person can have that memory be entirely neutral, so that there's no negative and then there's nothing else as well. All right, I think that is the time that we have for today. Check in with Joseph Turk if you want to come in person or via Zoom. He will send information to you on where to sign up. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.